of the huge free trade area encompassing most countries of the continent. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, AFCFTA. We all know that the creation of that single market for goods and services is a key element that we're all aspiring for, and it achieves the AU's ambitious agenda of 2063. The establishment of this zone is due to serve as a driving force for Africa's development. The adoption of common standards and progressive elimination of custom duties between countries in Africa could not only promote industrialization and increase regional trade, but also mitigate the tough impact of the trade war that's ongoing and the growing protectionism. Currently, only 16% of African countries trade with each other, and while intra-European trade is 65%. In a report, the United Nations Conference on Trade Development estimates that it will increase the intra-African trade by, the new convention will increase intra-African trade by 33% and generate $16.1 billion in additional revenue for African countries. This is substantial. 52 countries have signed the agreement since its creation in July 2018, of which 25 countries ratified the agreement, including many of the continent's economic drivers. The signatories of the agreement could create the world's largest free trade area, with an internal market of 1.2 billion people and combined GDP of $2.5 trillion. The African Union estimates that the implementation will increase intra-African trade by nearly 60% by only 2022. In an attempt to promote economic cooperation and trade with African countries and between them, the Central Bank of Egypt has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Afrexim Bank and made an initiative to provide knowledge and technical assistance to technical cadres of both African central banks and commercial banks on the use of the MANSA platform. This platform aims at exchanging identification data and all necessary information of African banks and institutions. Till now, more than 100 bankers from the central banks in Africa and commercial banks were exposed to this training at the Egyptian Banking Institute in Cairo, representing more than 20 African countries. The Central Bank of Egypt will continue the initiative as a result of the attractiveness of the program for African central banks and institutions. On the other hand, the African Union Commission and the AACB, bearing in mind the importance of the implementation of the new African Monetary Cooperation Program as a key pillar providing the framework for monetary integration, which achieves our objectives on the African continent, jointly convened a consultative meeting in Niamey, in Niger, in July 2019, and with the regional economic communities. That meeting aimed at discussing the African monetary cooperation and the recently revised macroeconomic convergence criteria that were approved by this convention. There are major achievements which have been made over the last year with regard to the collaboration and coordination between AACB and other entities, such as the Third African Union Commission, Specialized Technical Committee on Finance, Monetary Affairs, Economic Planning and Integration, which was held in Yaoundé, Cameroon, in March 2019, endorsed the AACB reports on the refinement of the convergence criteria and the timeliness and the timelines for the establishment of the African Central Bank, as well as the monitoring framework and peer review mechanism. Number two, the Central Bank of Egypt hosted 2 workshops in April 2019 on the integration of payment systems based on the request of this gathering on the continent, which explored the possibility of such integration and recommended the formation of a task force comprising member central banks and cooperating partners to deal with the issue. The CAB's annual conference and meeting held in Cairo in June 2019 also reviewed the activities of the existing 2 CAB's working groups led by South Africa and Nigeria. A new working group on Basel was also set up and will be led by the Central Bank of Egypt. Number 4, the Bank of South Sudan joined the AACB to increase the number of member countries of the African Union to 54 and central banks to 41. And in this occasion, I welcome the governor of the Southern Central Bank of Sudan, Southern Sudan, for joining our meeting. Number 5, the guidelines for the computation of the convergence criteria were also proposed by the Central Bank of Egypt to assist member central banks in computing convergence criteria. Subject matter was discussed in Sharm el-Sheikh last year by this meeting. The organization of paperless AACB meetings, as per your request, started with our annual meetings here in Kigali, which is an important development in the activities of the AACB. The Central Bank of Egypt also has done its best to achieve its commitment with the AACB chairmanship in implementing the initiatives and activities of the AACB at large. Distinguished governors, it is unfortunate that we meet here today with the Central Bank of Sudan not attending our assembly meeting. We all know the latest developments which took place in Sudan and the decision by the Peace and Security Council at the African Union to suspend the activities of the Republic of Sudan in the African Union, which in turn impacted the participation of the Central Bank of Sudan in our meetings in compliance with Article 4 of the AACB statutes. We all do hope that Sudan will be able to exit from its current situation and gain readmission to the African Union and Central Bank of Sudan to resume its important role in our activities. Dear governors, by the end of our meeting today, I will have the pleasure to hand over the AACB chairmanship as well as the CAB's chairmanship to my brother, Governor Rwangumboa. I would like to congratulate him in advance for being elected AACB chairman, and I wish him all the best for the next year. And we owe to support him with all the efforts and assistance that is possible. Myself and my staff will be ready to assist on any issues relating to the activities of the AACB and CABs over the upcoming year, and I wish AACB good luck in intensifying its efforts in the economic integration in the continent. We are going to present today the progress of our group over the last year. We are going to report on the 2 important meetings that the Bureau has conducted over the last year, and the progress and the agenda, which is a very hefty and long agenda and substantive, and I believe you will be satisfied with some of the humble progress that were achieved so far. I hope that I have been able to serve as much as possible to your expectations, and I look forward to joining you over the next years in this very important gathering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, for your opening remarks, with many things on which we will have to continue to work. Thank you very much. With your permission, Honorable Chairperson, I would like to give the floor to Honorable Victor Harrison, Commissioner of the Commissioner for Economic Affairs of the African Union Commission. Thank you. Prof. Harrison.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to ask you to take your headset because I speak in French, in our language of African Union Commission. Monsieur le Président de l'Association des banques centrales africaines, Monsieur le Vice-président de l'Association des banques centrales africaines, Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif, honorable gouverneur, honorables, distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs. Que dire encore après ce discours de Monsieur le Président, un discours de synthèse qui a marqué l'année de son mandat, un discours de synthèse qui a marqué les travaux qu'on a effectués ici ces derniers temps. honorables gouverneurs, mesdames et messieurs, ces 2 dernières années, la Commission de l'Union africaine a manifesté auprès de l'Association des banques centrales africaines sa volonté et sa détermination d'aller en avant pour les objectifs communs que nous nous sommes fixés. Et ce qui est encourageant, c'est qu'on a déjà des résultats. Je cite en particulier la volonté de la Banque centrale du Nigeria. Je tiens à remercier son honorable gouverneur n'est pas là, mais son représentant est ici. Je tiens à remercier donc la Banque centrale du Nigeria pour la décision prise donc pour la mise en œuvre de l'Institut monétaire africain, un pas vers la création donc de la Banque centrale africaine. Les activités qu'on a menées ici étaient toutes importantes. Si l'on revient un peu au thème sur la lutte contre la corruption et les flux financiers illicites, la Commission de l'Union africaine a organisé un comité technique spécialisé sur le thème l'année dernière. Et nous allons donc lancer cette année un ouvrage qui retient les travaux que nous avons effectués et l'association de banques centrales africaines sera destinataire d'un exemplaire de cet ouvrage. Dans cet ouvrage d'une 200 pages à peu près, il y aura d'abord la première partie composée par les contributions des organismes internationaux et des organismes internationaux et des organismes panafricains, type le FMI, l'ICBF, l'OCDE et d'autres encore, la coopération sud-sud des Nations Unies. Là, on a donc l'aspect, disons, conceptuel et l'aspect macro de la lutte contre la corruption et les flux financiers illicites. Mais pour la première fois, dans la deuxième partie, des États membres ont accepté d'apporter leur contribution, de partager ce qu'ils sont en train de faire pour la lutte contre la corruption et les flux financiers illicites. Mais ça ne s'arrête pas là. C'est un travail de longue haleine. Et on en a besoin, et j'appelle l'association des banques centrales, c'est qu'on a fait, et donc on a organisé un séminaire une année, ça ne s'arrête pas là. Il fallait continuer. Il fallait continuer parce que le temps est venu pour la mobilisation des ressources internes sur notre continent. Le thème de cette année, c'est sur les dettes. Les dettes, il y en a des points de vue, partagés ou non, mais les dettes sont là. Il faut savoir les gérer. Les expériences des uns et des autres hier nous ont permis de montrer que là, il y en a des pays qui ont commencé à faire des bonnes performances et qu'il faudrait partager, qu'il faut se servir d'exemples pour les autres dans la gestion des dettes. Et donc, là-dessus, nous devons encore continuer à travailler ensemble. Quels sont les fondamentaux, après tout, qu'il faut voir? C'est même la mise en place de la bonne gouvernance. La mise en place de la bonne gouvernance dans notre continent. Il y a des pays qui sont en avance, et je les félicite, mais il y en a des pays qui doivent faire encore des efforts dans ce sens. Notre continent regorge des ressources, 30% des ressources minérales mondiales. Notre continent, c'est une population jeune. Et notre continent, ça va être un grand marché dans ce monde. Mais malheureusement, notre continent se trouve encore dernier au niveau planétaire. Il est temps pour nous de réunir ensemble les forces, réunir ensemble les savoir-faire, parce que nous en avons. Nous n'avons pas besoin d'aller prendre des leçons ailleurs. Nous avons les capacités de nous en sortir. Voilà donc la situation où nous sommes. Je tiens ici donc à remercier l'étroite collaboration de mon département avec l'association des banques centrales sous la présidence de l'honorable gouverneur donc, de la Banque centrale de l'Égypte. Je tiens à rassurer l'honorable gouverneur de la Banque centrale de Rwanda que nous allons continuer et nous allons accélérer davantage notre collaboration. Je vous remercie, mesdames et messieurs.
Merci beaucoup, honorable commissaire pour les affaires économiques de la Commission de l'Union africaine pour votre message. Honorable Chairperson, after these two remarks, if you allow it, we should proceed and go over the different agenda items we have, adopt the agenda, and then proceeds with the work. If you allow, we could leave the floor to the chair of the technical committee for an overview of the agenda items. And once adopted, you could continue to consider each of the agenda items. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. As for the agenda item to be consumed today, and I hope it will be shown on the screen in front of us, we shall have around 21 annexes to review and adopt. Annex number 1, which is agenda item number 2, has to do with the adoption of the draft report on the ACB symposium, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, August 2018. Then Annex 2, the adoption of the draft report of the 41st Ordinary Meeting of the Assembly of Governors, which was held last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Then Annex 3, list of decisions of the Bureau meeting held on 13 March 2019 in Dakar, Senegal, and we shall have the implementation status of these decisions. Then Annex 4, information on the creation of the African Central Bank, the information provided by the African Union Commission. Annex 5 has to do with the progress report on the implementation of the African Monetary Cooperation Program in 2018. Annex 6, guidelines for the computation of the convergence criteria. Then Annex 7, a report on the consultative meeting which was held in Niger last July in Niamey, and it constitutes the AUC member central banks of the AECB and region economic communities. Annex 8, draft report of the AECB Continental Seminar for the year 2019, which was hosted by the Bank of Mauritius. Annex 9 has to do with the activities of the Community of African Banking Supervisors, the CAPS. Annex 10, it will be a report on the 2 workshops which were hosted by the Central Bank of Egypt last April on the development of an inter-regional payment systems integration frameworks and an inter-regional mobile payment strategy. Then Annex 11, a draft report on the experiences and initiatives of AECB member central banks in the development of fintech and cybersecurity. Then agenda item number 13, Annex 12, a report on the AECB OSSP forum, which was hosted by the South Africa Reserve Bank last June in collaboration with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and the European Central Bank. Then Annex 13, it will have to do with the selection of themes for the AECB 2020 Symposium and Continental Seminar. Then Annex 14, the draft work program and budget of the AECB Secretariat for the year 2020. Annex 15, report on the external auditors on the AECB accounts for the year ended on December 2018. Then we will have general information on contributions to the AECB 2019 budget and the Central Bank of Sudan. Then we will have the election of the AECB's chairperson and vice chairperson for the fiscal year 2019-2020 and the composition of the AECB Bureau for the upcoming year. And we will have information on the venue and dates of the Assembly of Governors meeting for next year. Then we will have some presentations which will be done by either cooperating partners or external entities, like the one on Annex 18, which will be done by the African Trade Insurance Agency, the proposal for capital relief. Then we will have a brief on the cooperation with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and also the cooperation with the European Central Bank. And at the end, we will have a presentation by the African Peer Review Mechanism on the support to member states on international credit rating agencies. And at the end, we will have a vote of thanks by Governor Bakari Jama, Central Bank of the Gambia. And at the end, we will have remarks by Honorable John Rwangumbwa, Governor, National Bank of Rwanda. This is today's agenda, Chairperson, for your adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we go ahead?
Thank you, Chairperson. Now, document 1, which I hope is in front of us all. We have a copy of it, a printed copy of document 1, which is the report of the Bureau to the Assembly of Governors. This is document 1, and I hope it will be screened also so that we can show what we are discussing. As for the introduction, on page 2, the Bureau meeting was held at the National Bank of Rwanda on the 30th of July 2019, 2 days ago, and it was headed by Honorable Governor Mr. Tariq Amri, Chairperson of the AECB, and it was attended by the 12 Bureau member central banks of the AECB, together with the African Union Commission. The first agenda item on our agenda is the draft report on the AECB Symposium, which was held last year in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh. And you will find that there is the presentation of the issue on paragraph 3.1, which talks about the main theme of the symposium, which was declining correspondent banking relationships and illicit capital flows, risks and policy challenges for Africa. You may recall that a lot of presentations were made, and we had 4 plenary sessions at this symposium. 3 of them talked about sub-themes for the main topic, and the 4th one talked about the experiences of member central banks in relation to the main theme of the symposium. And actually, this report was already adopted by the Bureau meeting last March in Dakar, and it is presented here for final adoption by the Assembly of Governors. Chair, with your permission, the deliberations and recommendations of the Bureau to the Assembly of Governors are cited on paragraph 3.2. The first one is that the Bureau approved the report on the symposium on 13 March 2019 in Dakar and should recommend its adoption by the Assembly of Governors. The Bureau should also recommend to the Assembly of Governors to express satisfaction with the arrangements made by Governor Tariq Amr, Chairperson of the AECB, to have a successful symposium in August 2018 in Sharm el-Sheikh, notably the opening of this event by His Excellency Dr. Mustafa Madbouly, Prime Minister of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Also, the Bureau expressed the need to have more defined targets, the owners for the recommendations, and to specify how to execute them. The need to train all staff of central banks on AML-CFT was also emphasized. Given the limited time governors have to go over the files of the Bureau meeting, after the technical committee meeting, the Bureau had discussions on the possibilities of extending the technical committee meeting or using new technologies of communication. To this end, the AACB Secretariat will start to make proposals to the next Bureau meeting in this regard. Last, the Bureau recommends to the Assembly of Governors to take note of the main conclusions of the symposium. Those are the recommendations, Chairperson, for your consideration.
Of course, this is an important topic when I speak about anti-money laundering and illicit financing and the KYC regulations. And we have found out in our bureau in Dakar is that there is awareness and training that needs to be given not just to central banks, but to the banking system, and not just to the people who are working in this specific function, but the global regulators. They look for awareness at all banking institution level, at all staff level, and that's what our regulators were saying, and we had discussed this. Not just staff that are dealing with clients, but there has been to be an upgrade of the awareness of banking staff at all commercial banks dealing with money and opening accounts and clients in terms of anti-money laundering and KYC. So this is a matter that is still open, and there is needs a lot of progress from our side, because we have discussed in Dakar that as long as we still have problems in de-risking by correspondent banks, this means that on this topic of KYC and AML, we still have a lot of work to be done. That's why we have asked for specific ownership and specific tasks to be determined for each of these recommendations, so that we make sure that there is a time plan and there's a targeted objective, measurable and time-bound, in order to make sure that the progress is reported. And on each of these tasks, that progress has to be reported regularly to the Bureau and to the Board of the Governors. If any of the governors have any comment on this, or before we move to the next topic. Next topic is the draft report on the ordinary meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Thank you, Chairperson. Annex 2, next agenda item is the draft report on the 41st ordinary meeting of the Assembly of Governors in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt last year. As for the presentation of the issue in 4.1.1 and 4.1.2, we have the number of member central banks which attended, and we have the participants. And in relation to the decisions which were made by the Assembly of Governors in Sharm el-Sheikh, I can announce that more than 95% of the decisions which were taken by the Assembly of Governors in Sharm el-Sheikh were implemented, and still there is only one decision to be implemented in relation to an MOU to be entered among jurisdictions in Africa in relation to the Community of African Banking Supervisors. As for the deliberations and recommendations of the Bureau, on paragraph 4.2, the Bureau recommends that the report, including the list of decisions as well as the matrix indicating the status of implementation of the decisions, be adopted as a fair reflection of the deliberations at the 41st Ordinary Meeting of the Assembly of Governors. The Bureau recommends to the Assembly of Governors that starting the current annual meetings, the reports for the Symposium and the Assembly of Governors be sent to member central banks for comments 6 weeks at the most after the annual meetings. Comments from member central banks will be expected 3 weeks later. The reports, including comments, will be submitted again to member central banks within 2 weeks for possible additional comments to be received by the AACB Secretariat 1 week later. The report is taking into account the possible additional comments will be considered adopted 3 months after the annual meetings. This process will allow to save time and avoid that the report is not approved by the Bureau meeting after 6 months, then adopted by the Assembly of Governors meeting after 1 year. The Bureau was informed that the AU Legal Department indicated that AU membership is only granted to countries of the African continent. No article in the AU statutes which provides for an observer status. As such, the ACB Secretariat is advised to adhere to the AACB statutes and see if La Banque Centrale de Haiti fulfills the requirements of an observer as may be stated in the statutes.
I would like to welcome the Governor of Central Bank of Haiti in our meeting today and join us. And this has been based on a decision by the AACB meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh and later Bureau meetings. We have discussed your joining this meeting, and we have tried to look legally in the statutes of our organization. And we would like to welcome you today as a guest to the governors and to the AACB meeting until we have reviewed the statutes of the AACB and to make sure that it complies with what are the requirements in the statutes in order to make sure that we are in compliance and that there is nothing that deviates from the statutes, or in case if there is amendments to the statutes required, then the AACB governors will have to discuss this at another meeting and be discussed in the next bureau and recommended to the governors how to really address this matter. But we have found in our bureau meeting that there is a sentiment to have Haiti as an attendant to our meeting today. So we are welcoming you here with us.
Thank you, Chairperson. As you have just mentioned, in accordance with the ACB statutes, although there is no article therein which states requirements for an observer status to be granted to a central bank whose country is not a member of the AU, following discussions on the issue, the Bureau directed the ACB Secretariat to amend the statutes to include provisions related to the terms and conditions for an observer status to be granted to a central bank whose country is outside the African continent. The draft revised statutes should be presented to the next Bureau meeting. In the meantime, La Banque de la République de Haïti would attend AACB meetings as guest. Finally, furthermore, since it could be difficult to have a multilateral MOU among central banks to promote the exchange of banking sector information, the term MOU should be replaced by agreement. This is for your consideration, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have a clarification to seek on point 4.2.6 related to this agreement. As we have seen, this is related to the decision that could not be implemented over the last year. And here it's being suggested that the term MOU be replaced by agreement. But Mr. Chairperson, the clarification I'm seeking is from the Secretariat. How are we planning to coordinate this multilateral agreement? Who is going to do what? And what should we do? Otherwise, if we don't really specify this, we might end up really having this again, not implemented when we come back for the AGM. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Yeah, we had tasked the community of African banking supervisors to work on an MOU between central banks in order to facilitate the exchange of banking information between central banks. And during our discussions yesterday, I guess there was a suggestion to consider an agreement instead of an MOU that could be a little bit more difficult in legal terms to achieve. That's why we say we will, with the Community of African Banking Supervisors, ask that we have an agreement between the central banks.
Who will take this forward to implementation?
Okay, we will have
question,
to,
right?
we will write to the AACB, to the CAPS chairperson, to have this issue brought in their agenda items during their next meeting. So that the CAPS, they had already, during the last CAPS meeting, assigned chair of a working group to come up with some draft of an MOU. So now we will just have to tell them that we are not working toward getting an MOU. It's an agreement we would like to have between the central banks. So there is already a central bank that is working toward drafting MOUs. So this is a task that was assigned to the Community of African Banking Supervisors, and they have to work on it. Now they had tasked one of the working groups to reflect and come with a draft. And we'll just have to inform them that we're no longer working toward getting an MOU, but we're working toward getting an agreement. Thank you. Yeah.
Just a small follow-up, Mr. Chairman, if you allow. I don't see a group of, I don't know how many central banks supervisors sitting and drafting. Do we have a draft, for instance, a working draft document which they can sit and discuss, or any expert really sitting and I'm just looking at the practical side of things. How are we going to have it drafted? Who is the legal team doing that? Maybe the Secretariat can help with coming up with a draft, I don't know. Thank you.
The CAPS are responsible, they already drafted an MOU. So now they're just going to amend it into an agreement. And in the process of their doing this, they use legal consultation with their own central banks. But the CAPS is the entity responsible for implementing this and getting it into reality. I understand your concern. No, there is ownership, and the CAPS will get this agreement into the light. So it is just changing the title of this rather from an MOU into agreement, but it is ready. It's already ready. Yes, Governor, please.
Honorable Governor, I think the point being raised by the Governor of Rwanda is really very important, because the framework for the African Monetary Integration Program, as approved by this August Assembly, has to dovetail through the regional groups to culminate in the establishment of an African Central Bank. Now, at the moment, the level of cohesion is more at the regional groups. Now, the AACB as currently constituted and at the level of development now, appears largely a loose organization based on simple understanding of African central banks. Now, if you want a framework that is operational, that can be trusted, it has to dovetail through the regional organizations, because the release of banking information is so critical to the stability of a country's financial system that I don't see how we have a loose agreement, for instance, between the Central Bank of Nigeria at the AACB level, and then the Central Bank of Namibia requests for critical banking information from Namibia, or Namibia requests from Nigeria, and then we just release on the basis of that kind of loose agreement. I would have thought that going through an MOU would have greater power of enforcement because it's going to be based on the level of understanding between central bank and first on the level of trust. And if that effort is generated through the regional institutions, I see it working better up to the point when we'll then have a common central bank, which we then host that kind of agreement over the entire continent. But at our level of development and aspiration towards a common central bank, if we take this as an omnibus agreement overall, I don't see it being effective because of the sensibility of banking information. Is my humble observation, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
But what matters is the content of this agreement or MOU? What matters really is the content and the scope of this collaboration, regardless of what we are naming it?
Well, Governor, absolutely correct. But no matter the content, the sensitivity of the information and how that information is going to be treated and the confidence.
But I haven't had the benefit of previous discussions on this matter here. It would be helpful to get some clarification as to why we propose to move from an MOU approach to an agreement approach. Because as I understand it, it's a change in terminology. It has very important legal implications, which form we use. An MOU is a statement of understandings in good faith, and it's a cooperation mechanism. An agreement, on the other hand, is legally enforceable, as it reflects binding commitment. From the point of view of a central bank, entering into a binding agreement of such a nature may have to involve consultations with other stakeholders before we make those commitments. And we have to ask ourselves what the effect of a breach of such an agreement would be. Is it an agreement that is enforceable against a central bank that for some reason is unable to provide that information and all of that? So I feel there are more fundamental questions we need to understand, and perhaps these have been resolved in previous discussions.
Good question, but I think maybe the point of view of some of the Bureau members when they discussed the change from MOU to agreement, because of our experience in collecting data from various central banks across the continent, which has been a daunting and a challenging matter, because even for our conversion criteria, getting the data has not been an easy task, and will not be able to consolidate all the data from all countries. In terms of an agreement, it's becoming binding, right? So maybe this was the point, is to bind central banks so that we can finally move forward. I don't know. Governor of Egypt.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Governor. Actually, we have a long experience with having MOUs with different central banks. Actually, it depends on the legal framework and the legal jurisdiction for each and every country. Therefore, it will be very, very difficult to have a common and unique MOU across all countries in our continent. Therefore, I would suggest that we replace and substitute MOU by having sort of standard templates or information to be agreed upon across all central banks, and this to be communicated to AACB as a hub for this information. Yeah. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to make a suggestion in order for us to move on this issue. My understanding is that even if we do have an agreement and it becomes binding, for us to ratify it as individual countries, we'll still have to consider our national laws. It will be a futile exercise if we draft an agreement only for us not to be able to ratify it because of our national laws. So my suggestion is that can we have a team, a legal team combined with bank supervisors that can re-look into what would be the best instrument or what would be the best way to do this. I feel that an agreement would still not work in the manner in which we are thinking about it now, and we have to go back to the drawing board to see what indeed can work.
Yeah, I think this is a good idea. We can ask the CABs to refer to legal counseling about that and understanding the objectives of this agreement or MOU, what is the exact objective, so that the legal consultants can draft something that does not require from countries to go to their parliaments, for instance, to sign something like this, or to becoming a daunting process. Egypt, please.
Just I would like to clarify that we have never seen any MOU to be legally binding. MOU is Memorandum of Understanding. Therefore, there is no enforcement to any country signed MOU to adopt or to adhere to what is in MOU. It's at the end, it's Memo of Understanding. It's not a legally binding commitment for the signed country to communicate even the scope in the MOU. Thank you.
Well, the governors are not sure if we don't have to have, if we need to have legally binding documents while we are pursuing what we are trying to pursue. So it's not a letter of guarantee or something. Okay, so the CABs will be responsible to review this. And does everybody in the room have the sentiment that it better be an MOU on a best effort basis and on the sentiments of each central bank? I think it's better proceed as concluded. Yeah. Okay, so the CABs will look into it. Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Chairperson. The next agenda item is on Annex 3, list of decisions of the Bureau meeting held in Dakar on 13th March 2019. And as for the deliberations and recommendations of the Bureau recommended to the Assembly of Governors to take note of the list of decisions and the matrix on the implementation status of the decisions. This is the recommendation for your recommendation. And if you allow me, Chairperson, we have a quick presentation on the status of implementation of the decisions which were taken in Sharm el-Sheikh, and also the decisions which were taken in the Bureau meeting last March, and also what is the progress made during the last year. With your permission, Chair, we can show this presentation.
Please go ahead. It's very important always to see a follow-up, always reporting the status of decisions. Otherwise, some decisions, if not reported regularly, can fall into the cracks. Go ahead.
Thank you. I hope the presentation will be screened now. This is a presentation, as you see, on the decisions made by the 41st Ordinary Meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh. And we can see that for most of the decisions, for example, the decision to send a letter to the AUC to table the reports on the refinement, this was done, and the reports were presented in the STC in Yaoundé last March. Then, as for the Community of African Central Bank Supervisors, the Central Bank of Egypt already hosted the annual conference and meeting of the CABs last June in Egypt. Then, when it comes to the decision to give attention to the issue of de-risking, it was discussed during the CABs meeting in Egypt. As for the stock taking on fintech and cybersecurity was done, and a report will be presented to our meeting today. As for the decision to explore integration of payment systems, 2 workshops were hosted by the Central Bank of Egypt last April, and a report will be presented to our distinguished meeting. As for the decision that the theme of the Continental Seminar is renewed protectionist tendencies, the Continental Seminar was successfully hosted by the Bank of Mauritius. And also the observer status, we already sent AUC a letter, and we sought legal advice from the EU, and the AUC provided the legal advice in our Bureau meeting. Also for the OSSB AACB Africa Forum, it was hosted by the South African Reserve Bank last June. And in relation to the collaboration with the European Central Bank, the European Central Bank will be with us here to present. Then the minister's request to hold consultative meetings with the REX, a consultative meeting was held early July in Niamey, Niger, and a report will be presented to our meeting. As for the caps to discuss on de-risking, this was done by the CAPS working groups. So we can see that mostly more than 95% of the decisions of Sharm el-Sheikh Assembly meeting were carried out. As for the Bureau decisions, the Bureau said that the experiences and the initiatives of member central banks of fintech and cybersecurity be discussed at the CAPS level, and this was done during the CAPS annual meetings, and these activities were referred to the 2 working groups of CAPS led by South Africa and Nigeria. Also, there was the Central Bank of Egypt's initiative to make AACB go paperless, and now, in our meeting now, this initiative is being implemented with the successful collaboration between Bank of Rwanda and AACB, who provided every possible things to make these meetings go paperless. Then, as for the guidelines of the computation, there was a decision in the Bureau that these guidelines be sent to all member central banks for comments, and this was done, and the new version of the guidelines will be presented to our meeting. So, we can see that mostly or more than 95% of the decisions in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Dakar were implemented. If you allow me, Chairperson, these are the initiatives by the Central Bank of Egypt over 1 year, and also the initiatives to be carried out in the upcoming period. The Central Bank of Egypt hosted the CAPS annual conference in June, and it was announced that there will be a 3rd CAPS working group on Basel, which will be led by the Central Bank of Egypt. The Central Bank of Egypt initiated the guidelines to help member central banks to easily compute the convergence criteria. Also, the Central Bank of Egypt was pleasured and honored to present its initiative to make AACB go paperless, which is already taking place now. Also, there is the initiative by the Central Bank of Egypt, as we said, to create a database for the convergence criteria. And also there was a decision in Sharm el-Sheikh that if any member central banks did not report and did not provide data, so data from international financial institutions will be used after consulting member central banks just to make them committed to provide data. Also, the Central Bank of Egypt initiated an acceleration of the process through which the reports of the meetings of the Assembly of Governors were submitted, and we already adopted the recommendation to change.
Where will the database be kept?
I think it is on the website of the AACB. The Secretariat can provide guidelines here.
And this is secure data?
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Yeah, we, with the decision taken to take information from international databases in case you don't receive on a timely manner contributions from the central banks. You could go to the international databases and collect the data. So
This is data for the convergence criteria?
exactly.
Just
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Yeah, that's data for the convergence criteria. So we just to keep them, we can keep them on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Another initiative by the Central Bank of Egypt was the hosting of the 2 workshops on the development of an inter-regional payment system and integrated inter-regional mobile payment strategy. And in this meeting, a task force was formulated, combining AECB member central banks and cooperating partners, and a report will be presented to our meeting. Also, on the level of the African continent, the Central Bank of Egypt, in collaboration with Afrexim Bank, hosted and will still host trainings on the Mansa data repository depository platform. And as you see, a lot of African countries sent their calibers from member central banks and from even commercial banks from Zambia, Liberia, Djibouti, Nigeria, Sudan, Guinea, Malawi, and a lot of other countries to have training on the use of this data depository platform, which was initiated by Afrexim Bank. Also, the Mr. Benedict Orama, Professor Benedict Orama, he highlighted the Central Bank of Egypt's efforts in promoting intra-Africa trade, and this was in the annual meetings of Afrexim Bank, which were held in Moscow in 2019, through training banking calibers from central and commercial banks on the use of the Mansa data depository platform. Something else was the proposal by the Central Bank of Egypt, which was presented before the African Peer Review Mechanism, EPRM, Third Methodology Forum, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh last April, to propose the establishment of an African credit rating agency, because, and we will have a presentation by the EPRM this afternoon on the issue. And there was a study which was prepared by experts from the Central Bank of Egypt, and it was presented. So this, last but not least, it gives us pleasure as the Central Bank of Egypt to say that we have tried our best to achieve last year's goals and decisions, which we believe was a result of the cooperation and willingness of the member countries in collaboration with the AECB Secretariat, member central banks, and the National Bank of Rwanda. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Let's proceed, please.
Thank you, Chair. The next agenda item is the information on the creation of the African Central Bank. And this information was presented to the Bureau by the African Union Commission. It gives information about the current status of the efforts to establish the African Central Bank.
One comment I want to say. If you are going to present on behalf of one central bank what they've been doing, then they should, before the meetings, communicate with all the central banks and ask them if there is something that they would like to present as well. Because everybody here has activities and things that are being done. So I think it's out of the context. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. As for the information on the creation of the African Central Bank, information was provided during the Technical Committee meeting and the Bureau meeting on the efforts to establish the African Monetary Institute and the agreement by the between the African Union Commission and the government of Nigeria for the establishment of the African Monetary Institute, and also the efforts done by the AUC to accelerate the process of establishing the African Monetary Institute, which will supervise all the upcoming steps for the creation of the African Central Bank. As for the deliberations and the recommendations of the Bureau in relation to this agenda item, The Bureau recommends that the Assembly of Governors takes note of the information provided by the AOC as reflected in Annex 4 and confirms the Association's commitment to work together towards the strengthening collaboration efforts in implementing the joint strategy through inter alia, the monitoring and the evaluation of the performance of member states in terms of macroeconomic convergence. The ACB will work closely with the African Union Commission to revisit the joint AUC-AACB strategy using the AACB convergence criteria and timelines as the reference points.
It's a very important committee, and we look forward to its products, I'm sure, because it's in. Please, Governor Kganiago.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's nice, it's good information. I'm just concerned as to whether when we meet and we discuss these things, whether suggestions go anywhere in terms of exploration. Because you see, when we met in Pretoria, we cautioned and we asked the European Central Bank to present and share with us their experiences in terms of lessons learned in their implementation of the ECB. Yesterday at the symposium, the ECB still shared with us the pitfalls that they had experienced and the lessons learned. And throughout taking this journey from Pretoria to Egypt, union, and whether absent a banking union, you are able to function. And the lessons from the euro area showed that there were significant pitfalls precisely because there wasn't a banking union. And subsequent to the crisis, to the euro area crisis, the euro area ended up having to establish a European banking authority, and they ended up having to establish a European resolution mechanism. These are very important lessons. And yesterday, as the ECB was presenting, they said that part of the complexity is also that fiscal policy diverges and does not play ball. And here we are running ahead, we are tasking people to go and even start with drafting the statutes, and we are not taking cognizance of the genuine issues that as central bankers, we raised meeting after meeting. And so I do not understand, as we're sharing this information, how these things just fall off and be ignored as we proceed with the establishment of the African Central Bank. And I fear that we will be failing our leaders because we are the central bankers, we understand this trade of central banking, and yet it looks like we raise these things, either our voice does not get heard or it gets ignored, I don't know by who, because these issues we have raised in so many meetings and in so many of the symposia, but they do not seem to be taken cognizance of in trying to progress this important continental project of ours.
Governor, I can understand, and I might have kind of similar concerns. And I think when I think about this matter and where we're going and the organization we are using to achieve what we want, I think it needs revision. The setup we have, that whereby we are managing this very complex matter, I don't think it's the ideal setup. Because, like you said, we have technical committees, CAPS, we have payment system committees, and then we have this, and we are working actually on 101 topics.
we are very scattered. And then we are working at the same time trying to look at a common central bank and a common currency. And this is a very serious matter that needs serious decisions. And also it needs the right organization and expertise around us working for this group of governors on this matter. And it is not, we cannot ask for consultancy or expertise on an ad hoc basis. This needs a permanent group of experts. It needs working with very senior economists in the world to understand, you know, the $200,000 a year so that you can get for yourself a unified African central banks after so many years. No way. Any international consultant will charge you 2 million sterling pounds in 2 weeks. So I think this is something to be revised. On the other side, there are structural matters that we've discussed in Dakar and we've discussed yesterday in the Bureau. And we discussed and we've spoken with Mr. Victor Harris on these matters several times in terms of the empowerment of our central banks. How are we going to implement unified monetary policies? You were on a panel yesterday and you were speaking with passion on a subject that I totally found resonance to, because the symposium was talking about the challenges of external debt and challenges of government debt, but you talk more pragmatically about it. We all know that the growth of debt is not good, but what should we do about it, and what on the ground challenges we are facing vis-à-vis governments where we don't have much control over this debt growth? What should we do? So what should we do was not addressed yesterday. You know, we had very nice presentations about African debt and its growth and so on. What should we do? What in our hands to do to stop this, for instance, or to manage this, or to tame it, you know? And maybe we need also to revise the way we are presenting our agenda that has been there for years. That we need to have at the beginning a brainstorming session between ourselves for key points that are really strategic. So what you have spoken now is a complete change to the model of operations of this organization. And for me, this is my last day as chairman, but as member, we could discuss. Yeah. So, but I leave the secretary also to answer to your intervention, which is